Hello, my spookies. It's your host and narrator, Henrique Couto here, yet again with a little bit more of the best of 2024. Weekly Spooky is heading into its 6th year right now, and we've had many great stories worth revisiting. But last year was especially vast in our new authors and new stories that brought chills to our bones. So tonight, I bring you 4 of the finest examples of horror from 2024 here at Weekly Spooky, from 4 authors that you may have heard of, or maybe are new to you. Either way, it's worth your time, so kick back, relax, and let's begin. Terror on Your Radio Dial by Bruce Haney. Josh had always wanted to see a ghost. He was obsessed with the idea of seeing something otherworldly. At only 12 years old, he consumed all the supernatural-related media he could find, which wasn't much in 1992. He had all his brother's old comic books. Most of them were superhero comics, but there were a few issues of things beyond this world that he cherished and read over and over again. Josh was also a frequent visitor to the horror section of Boring Encore Video. Yes, Josh lived in a small town known as Boring, Oregon, which he found boring. So, the idea of ghosts and otherworldly things was an escape for him. Josh tried to search the historical archives of the local newspaper for stories, but found little, and it was more time-consuming than a kid his age could handle. But he did know of the Gitter House. All kids knew about that house. It wasn't much to behold. It didn't have fancy architecture, no gargoyles or iron rod fencing. But the house did show its age. The weathered wood of the 3-story house had many layers of peeling paint and numerous layers of shingles on its time-worn roof. A house like that always had its legends. The main one was of an amateur electrical engineer who lived in the house in the 1940s and was obsessed with the power of radio and was using his modified ham radio equipment to try to reach the other side. Josh did find one mention of this man in the papers when he had looked. In 1949, the Boring Herald had a small blurb that read, "Boring man is insane. Carl Gitter of Boring was arrested today after several alleged attacks on neighbors and his family. He was committed to the asylum and will be taken there late this evening or early tomorrow." Josh had been making plans to visit the house, but before he got his nerve up, a family moved in. Luckily for Josh, they had a kid his age named Mike. Josh was quick to make friends with him. Once the friendship was established, he suggested a sleepover. Mike would agree, but always wanted to have it at Josh's house. After the 3rd time of having it at his house, Josh insisted they have it at Mike's. "Dude, we will have way better snack choices at your house," Mike argued. "Yeah, but my parents are always hovering and probably wouldn't approve of us staying up late to watch horror movies." Josh argued back and then remembered something Mike had told him. So he added, "Plus, you're the one that bragged you have your own television," Josh argued. "Yeah, but it's just my parents' old 19-inch set and the colors bleed," Mike explained. "Your own television in your room beats a front room television with hovering parents any day," Josh replied. "Fine," Mike said. That night was perfect for the sleepover because late-night host Madame Goulette was showing 2 back-to-back ghost flicks on Channel 5. Josh, of course, loved horror movies that involved ghosts. Mike was more of a monster kid. One of the reasons that Mike might not have cared for ghosts was because his house was haunted, and Mike had seen a spirit. When Josh first became friendly with Mike, he asked him if he had seen any ghosts there. "That's baby stuff. I don't believe in ghosts," Mike had said and then laughed. But Josh thought Mike might have been hiding something behind that laughter. Later, as the two became closer, Mike revealed that he had seen something spooky in the house. "I only saw something once. It was late at night, and it was when we first arrived with all our stuff after the long drive from our old house. We were supposed to get here in the afternoon and get stuff unloaded, but my dad got us lost taking one of his shortcuts. We were all tired, but we had to unload some stuff into the house, at least the bedding. I had made a couple of trips, and then while my parents were setting up a makeshift area for us to sleep, I went back out to the moving van to grab my radio to see if there were any cool stations in this burb. As you know, that was a waste of time. I checked AM and FM. But while I was messing with the antenna of the radio, trying to find stations, I looked up to the window of the room, the one that's mine now, and I saw a man, and he stared back at me. I stared for a moment, and then he smiled. Then, from my radio, I heard him say, "Welcome home," Mike finished. "Then what?" Josh asked. That was all he got to say because I was so freaked out I dropped my radio, Mike explained. "So what did you do?" Josh asked. "I ran to my parents. They thought I was crazy, but they searched the house anyways, but found nothing," Mike said. "Did you ever try to reach him again?" Josh asked. "My radio hasn't worked since. It still plays cassettes all right, but the radio part's broken," Mike explained. For the sleepover, because of Mike's story, Josh brought his own radio. He also brought a book called True Facts About Ghosts. The book was more or less a parody of those books for kids like Dinosaur Facts or Bird Facts, the kind with very few words and many full-page color photos. Josh knew it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but thought that it had some truth to it. Before Josh arrived at Mike's house, he decided that he wouldn't talk about ghosts right away. He would wait until the first movie of the night, so sometime during 13 Ghosts. Since it was a sleepover situation, they didn't have to eat dinner with Mike's folks. They got frozen pizza and generic root beer, which they took up to Mike's room to eat. Mike's room was a typical 80s boys' room. Socks on the floor, magazine cutouts of rock bands on his walls. His only full-size poster was of a hot rod car. Josh had been hoping to feel spooky vibes as soon as they entered his room, since it was where the ghost had been. But everything seemed normal. Josh waited all night as they ate pizza and played video games. Finally, Madame Goulette's Dark Theater started. She introduced 13 Ghosts by telling them how the director had a gimmick for when it had played in the theaters. The gimmick was a pair of glasses that you would put on so that you could see the ghosts. Josh decided that this was his cue. "Maybe that's not too far off," Josh said. Mike finished chewing his pizza and then slurped some root beer. "What?" Mike asked. "Maybe you need a device to see or interact with ghosts, like you and your radio." "With the radio, you heard him speak," Josh finished. "Dude, ghosts aren't real. I was just tired and it was a new place. Come on," Mike said. "Are you scared to talk about it because we're in the room where you saw him?" Josh asked. "Just shut up about it," Mike replied, and then looked around the room, half expecting to see the figure again. Josh knew that Mike was afraid, so it was kind of mean of him to then say, "Did you know a guy that lived here was found insane and taken to an asylum?" Mike's first response was to punch Josh in the shoulder, and then replied with, "Dude, I said shut up." The boys found the second movie boring. It was called The Terror. It had a couple of big names in the cast, but had little else going for it. Since they were both bored, Josh opened his backpack and brought out his radio and the ghost book. Mike laughed. "Come on, what's with that kid's book?" he asked. "It's the only book that the school library had on ghosts, so give me a break," Josh explained. "You are not going to let this ghost thing go, are you?" Mike said as he took the book from him and started looking through it. "There are many kinds of ghosts. There are vengeful ghosts, residual ghosts, poltergeists, and there are ghosts that are not ghosts at all, like demons that are pretending to be ghosts," Mike read aloud and then laughed. "This book is a joke," Mike said. While Mike looked through the book, Josh turned on the radio and slowly scrolled from the band's left side to the right, scanning and listening for otherworldly voices. Mike looked up at Josh with a raised eyebrow, but said nothing. At this time of night, the sounds that came from it were mostly talk radio and old-timey music that Josh assumed was either Beethoven or Mozart, since that was all he knew of as far as classical music. It wasn't. While he searched the band, he heard Chopin and Tchaikovsky, but he heard no ghosts. Ghosts have been known to affect electromagnetic waves, Mike read aloud. What does that mean? Josh asked. I don't know, but maybe it has something to do with how ghosts can manipulate radio waves, Mike said, unsure of himself.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Did you know the insane man was a ham? Josh asked. A ham? Yeah, an amateur radio dude, Josh said. Why do they call them a ham? Mike asked. I don't know. They operate ham radios, but why they call the radio ham, I don't know. I didn't check out a book on ham radios, Josh said, annoyed that he didn't know. Mike felt bad that his guest was getting upset, so, against his better judgment, he decided that he would help him and show some interest. Did you check AM? Mike asked. No, just FM, Josh replied. I think I was on AM when I heard him, Mike said. Josh started to scan through the airwaves on AM, and then Mike tried to talk to the ghost. Hello? Hello, ghost? Mike said. No response from the radio. It's not going to work. Did you really see a ghost? Josh asked. Try adjusting the antenna. I was messing with it at the time. I was pointing it towards my room. I think that's north. Try north, Mike said. Josh followed his directions. After a few seconds, the static got a little louder. Josh adjusted the antenna, while he turned the tuner left and right. Under the normal static, he could hear a buzz that seemed to get louder as he moved to the right. Once the buzz was at its peak, he turned the volume up a little more and moved the antenna around. Then, the buzzing stopped. Mike and Josh froze and listened intently. Mike felt goosebumps forming on his arms. Josh thought about adjusting the antenna a little bit more or turning the tuner back to the left a bit, but neither moved, and eventually, clear as day, they heard. Hello, boys, the ghost spoke. The voice came from the radio, but the boys looked around for the man. So far, he hadn't appeared. Who are you? Josh asked. I am Mr. Gitter, Mr. Gitter replied. What do you want? Mike asked. You reached out to me, Mr. Gitter replied, and then laughed to himself. As he laughed, Mr. Gitter started to fade into existence near the window. The two boys watched, and suddenly, they no longer had any more questions to ask. Mr. Gitter was nicely dressed in pressed slacks and a sweater with only one blemish. Right where his heart should be, there was a large hole that had blood dripping from it every second or so, like his heart was still pumping, ever so slightly. The two boys watched as the blood stained the sweater further. Mr. Gitter noticed their fascination. Oh, this old thing? Mr. Gitter said while poking his finger through the hole in his chest. Sometimes the cost of intellectual intrigue is high. Mr. Gitter continued and laughed loudly, revealing teeth that were still white, but looked larger than normal as his gums had receded, revealing the roots of his teeth. Josh thought to himself, how do those teeth even stay in? Mr. Gitter floated towards the two boys. Are you ready to come to the other side? Mr. Gitter asked. Mike was terrified and snatched the radio away. Get out of my room! Mike yelled, and then turned the dial as quickly as he could. Mr. Gitter disappeared as soon as the channel was switched.
It will continue to rain for the next 4 days. Sunday might possibly have a break, so plan on getting all those outside chores done then, but...
A female voice said on the radio before Mike turned it off. Both of the boys were relieved. "Let's never do that again," Josh said. "Yeah," Mike agreed. But they were young and their wills were not great. Before the night was through, they had made a plan to contact him one more time so that they could record his voice on Josh's radio. Something to impress the other kids with at school on Monday morning. Neither of the boys had a fresh cassette, but Josh knew the trick where you put tape over a hole in the side so that the player would think it was a blank tape. It took Mike a while to decide which of his tapes he would sacrifice. He decided on Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, Side A. It wasn't one of his favorites. He did Side A over Side B because B had Glory Days on it, which he liked. By the time the second movie had ended, they were ready. They might have tried to waste more time to build up their nerve, but all the television stations had gone off the air for the night. With nothing else to do, they decided it was time to reach back out to Mr. Gitter. Mike handed the tape to Josh, who wasted no time putting it in and hitting the record button. Then he turned the tuner to find Mr. Gitter again. It took him a few minutes, but he never looked at the dial when he had tuned him in the first time.
"Hello again, boys,"
Mr. Gitter's voice said out of the speakers. Before he could speak again, Josh pulled out his ghost book to ask Mr. Gitter some questions. Are you a vengeful spirit? A poltergeist? What kind of ghost are you?" Josh asked.
"What type of ghost am I?"
Mr. Gitter asked while chuckling to himself.
"I wouldn't call myself a ghost. I have merely switched from one plane to another. A greater plane of existence. Come with me and see. You'll understand shortly, and all your questions will be answered,"
Mr. Gitter said as he approached the two boys. This was the moment they panicked about last time. This time, they remained brave. Josh looked at the radio dial just in case they did panic. 1170 AM. "We will not go with you," Josh said firmly. "Yeah," Mike said, sounding less confident.
"You have no choice,"
Mr. Gitter informed them. The two boys exchanged worried glances. "Bail?" Josh asked Mike. "Bail!" Mike yelled. They were chickening out again. Josh grabbed the dial and went to turn it, but it wouldn't move. He was a smart boy, though. He pressed the power button instead, but there was no luck there either. It wouldn't budge. Gitter was getting stronger. Josh dropped the radio, but that act did not stop Mr. Gitter. Mr. Gitter, in fact, got brighter, becoming nearly as flesh and blood as they were. The hole in his chest even started pumping blood out faster while the lights in the house began to flicker. In response, the boys ran downstairs. Mike's parents had already gone to bed, so they didn't notice the lights were flickering. His parents did wake up moments later when they heard the downstairs radio turn on. The sound of various stations could be heard as it tuned itself to 1170.
"Come on, boys. Everyone is waiting,"
Mr. Gitter's voice said, coming out of the downstairs radio at full volume. At that point, Mr. Gitter was powerful enough that it didn't matter where the antenna was pointed. The next sound the boys heard, as Mr. Gitter went to grab them, was the door of Mike's parents' bedroom opening. But it was too late. Mr. Gitter was able to reach the two boys and grab them in a big bear hug while laughing. The volume of his laughter lowered as all three of them began fading out of our world. Mike's dad entered the living room 1 second too late. They were gone. A moment later, all 6 light bulbs above his head in the aging chandelier exploded, and he could have sworn he heard a faint voice coming from the radio that laughed while it said,
"End of broadcast."
Mike's parents moved away from Boring a few months later because Josh's parents blamed them for the disappearance and seeing them around town at the boring country store was hard for them to deal with while managing their own mourning. Mike's parents couldn't deal with packing up their son's room, so they hired movers who prepared all of Mike's things to be donated. One mover even took the tape from the radio and put it back in its case. He thought about taking the tape. Who would know? But the mover was more of a new wave guy anyway. He did empty the kid's piggy bank before packing it. The recording was eventually found by accident. A guy bought a bunch of cheap cassettes from the thrift store for a road trip. He was shocked when instead of hearing Bruce Springsteen, he heard weird audio of a creepy man talking to some kids. He thought it was interesting enough that he called into an AM talk show about conspiracies and the supernatural. The host was curious and had airtime to kill, so he agreed to air the tape. So then, once again, Mr. Gitter's voice came across the airwaves.
Hello again, boys.
After this airing, rumors of young kids disappearing after playing with their radios, trying to hear Mr. Gitter, started to spread. But those are just playground urban legends, aren't they?
Did you hear that? Better check the locks on your doors. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Catching a Buzz by David O'Hanlon. This sucks, 9-year-old Grover Wright said, dumping out his trick-or-treating bag on the foot of his bed. Halloween should be a whole month. You can't get enough candy in just a few hours. Look at this. Mine's not any better, Will told him. His 11-year-old brother emptied his own bag onto the pile. It was only the 9th of November, and they were down to 11 rolls of Smarties, 3 pumpkin-shaped chocolate-covered marshmallows, entirely too many peanut butter kisses, 18 jawbreakers, 2 chocolate crosses with Bible verses stapled to their wrappers, 7 fun-sized Mr. Good bars, a tube of pumpkin spice chapstick, and a dozen coffin-shaped boxes of candy sticks. There was no way they'd be able to stretch their loot until the Christmas candy haul. Will tore open one of the marshmallow treats and stuffed it into his mouth. I think this is from last year, he mumbled as he chewed. I'm not eating the stupid orange and black things. No one even knows what they are, Grover said. What are we going to do? Bucks. Will held up a hand and swallowed the gooey candy with a loud gulp. Bucks might have more clearance candy. I still have $10 from helping Mr. Stacks take down his decorations. Bucks is way on the other side of town, Grover said. Even Clarissa would notice us being gone that long. Clarissa Hart was the worst babysitter in Kohler. Of course, not many people wanted the job after the horrible murders a few years prior. They never found the killer's body, after all. Most sitters were only available during daylight hours, in fear the pig-faced man would get them too. The Wrights had to take what they could get, and in the months surrounding the anniversary of the babysitter massacre, they could get Clarissa. Will did the mental math. If he hustled, he could make it to the store in 20 minutes, 10 to get the candy, then 20 to make it back. There was a small possibility Grover could manage to avoid Clarissa entirely for an hour. Of course, if she found out, Will sighed. There's nothing more conniving, vengeful, and malicious than a high school senior. Their parents wouldn't be home for 3 more days. Clarissa would confiscate the goodies and have them catering to her every need until she was relieved of duty. What's up, losers? Clarissa said from the doorway. The babysitter strolled into the room without an answer or invitation. She snatched up a handful of the candy and shook it around like dice before dropping it. Definitely losers. This is a terrible stash, she said. You can't eat this for dinner. What is for dinner? Grover asked. I'm the babysitter, not the cook, Clarissa shrugged. There's lean cuisine in the freezer. Pick one. Those are Mom's, Will informed her. Yeah, well, apparently she's not eating them. Clarissa picked up one of the rolls of Smarties and smiled mischievously. Or you could have pizza. You'd get us pizza? Will shifted uncomfortably. What's the catch? Haven't you been on TikTok in like the last week? Clarissa sneered. Come with me. The babysitter left the room with the candies. Grover and Will exchanged concerned looks, then followed her downstairs. There are few things in the world that aren't worth doing for pizza. Clarissa had already unrolled the candies and laid out several on the dining table. The boys gathered around while she ran for her clutch. She returned with $2 bills, her vape, and her phone. Noticing their expressions, Clarissa explained it all. There's a new challenge going around, she said. You crush up the Smarties and make 2 lines of powder, and then see who can snort theirs the fastest. Pretty simple. That sounds dangerous, Will said, and stupid. Which means you two are totally qualified to do it for my followers, Clarissa responded. It could go viral and you could be popular for a change. Plus, I'll get you pizza. Does it hurt? Grover asked. Not if you do it right. Clarissa used her vape to crush the sweet tablets. You just have to smash up all the little pieces. My mother and her boyfriend do it with her Xanax literally every night. A minute later, 2 sugary rails laid across the tabletop, and the brothers each held a rolled-up dollar. Clarissa opened her camera to record them, but neither moved toward their starting line. This is like drugs, Grover said. Well, it's called a sugar high, isn't it? Clarissa waved for them to start. Drugs are bad, Grover told her. I don't want to do this. I'll get lava cakes with the pizza, Clarissa offered. And cheesy bread? Will counteroffered. Jesus, I'm offering you TikTok stardom here. She pointed at the candy cocaine. That could be the start of your influencer careers right there. At least show us how to do it first, Will said, moving his hand to his back pocket. Oh my God, fine. Clarissa snatched the dollar from him and leaned over the table. You just stick it up your nose, then put it to the line, cover the other nostril, and inhale. Watch closely because I'm not doing it twice. Oh, we're watching. Will sneakily pulled his phone out and swiped for the camera. Go ahead and show us how it's done. Clarissa snorted the line noisily. She started coughing, then squeezed her nose and shook her head. Her eyes watered as she turned around. It's not that bad, she lied. Will and Grover burst with laughter. She used her sweater to clear her vision. Her face contorted into a vicious scowl when she saw the phone pointed at her. Delete that, she demanded. Nothing to delete, Will told her. We're live. You're right, it's getting a lot of reacts. Did you know your leggings are see-through? You little shit, turn it off! Clarissa rubbed her sore nose. I mean it, Will Wright. Turn that phone. Why are you looking at me like that? Will let the phone drop and pointed at Clarissa. You're bleeding. Clarissa pulled her hand away from her face and saw the crimson smear. She looked down at the drops staining her top and ran out of the room, stripping the cashmere garment off as she did. So, does this mean we're not getting pizza? Grover shouted after her. The slamming of the bathroom door told him they weren't. The smoke detector's screeching brought Clarissa out to investigate. She hadn't smelt the smoke with the cotton balls shoved up into her hemorrhaging nostrils. She fanned the air on the way to the kitchen where Will was climbing onto the breakfast nook to deactivate the alarm. Black smoke billowed from the oven. Clarissa threw open the back door and then pulled up the window over the sink. What the fuck are you two doing? She dragged Grover away from the stove. Go open more windows. I felt bad, Will admitted after finally hitting the button to silence the alarm. You know, because you got blood on your sweater and everyone saw the video. So you thought arson would make up for it? Clarissa found the oven mitts and removed the pan from inside. The plastic handle had been reduced to long melted strings that stretched from the pan to the glowing orange heating coil. The contents were an unidentifiable blackened mass that smelled something like chocolate and an electrical fire. The sitter made her way to the back door and tossed the entire thing into the yard. "We were trying to make a chocolate cake for you," Will explained. "That was a skillet. You can't stick that in the oven." "The instructions said to use a round pan." "You two are cleaning the melted plastic out of the stove tomorrow," Clarissa snapped. Her face softened. It was sweet, though. Completely idiotic, but sweet. "We'll have to leave the windows up so the house can air out before your folks get home." "What about flies?" Grover said, fanning one away as he returned to the kitchen. "Flies are harmless."
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Clarissa plucked a piece of bloody cotton from her nose. "Ugh, it's just holding in the smoke smell." Clarissa, moved by the gesture and her own hunger, decided to order a pizza for them. They ate on the patio while the house continued to air out. She was starting to think the kids, despite being losers like all kids are, weren't so bad when she finally sent them to bed. After closing and locking all the doors and windows, she was pretty much done for the night herself. The smoke had aggravated the abrasions in her nose, making it sore again, but the bleeding seemed to have stopped. Clarissa felt stupid falling for her own gag. She dug a pair of hydros from her purse that she'd lifted from her mom's stash. Tylenol probably would have sufficed, but the painkillers would make sure she could sleep, despite the lingering stench of burnt plastic. The pills worked perfectly. She slept through the odor, and through the large, strangely colored fly that landed on her lip. Clarissa dabbed her nose with folded toilet paper. The stupid internet challenge was drawing a lot of flack. Apparently, numerous kids trying it had experienced infections from microabrasions caused by the crumbled Smarties. She didn't need to further embarrass herself by getting a staph infection in her nose. The mild ache of the scratches had grown more uncomfortable throughout the school day, but the bleeding hadn't started until the walk to the right home. She'd ran in the gas and grub and straight for the bathroom when she felt the tiny rivulet tickling her lip. Once she was sure it had finished, she double-checked her top for stains. Content that she looked presentable enough, she went back out into the gas station and immediately groaned with disgust. Ross Garvey saw her too. They'd scheduled their third date before the emergency call that pulled the rights away. Clarissa had been relieved. Ross might have been a sexy football star, but he was also a brain-dead degenerate. Worse yet, he'd accepted a scholarship to Texas A&M. Clarissa Hart dating an Aggie? Talk about social suicide. She waved politely and went to the cooler to get a drink. Ross came up behind her. His hand found her hip without invitation. "Hey, Clarissa, you haven't texted back," he said. "I've been working," Clarissa turned. "It's a week-long gig. I'll give you a call when it's done." "Or I could just come by," Ross suggested. "We can make that our date. A little Netflix and a lot of chill." "Quarterbacks score," Clarissa said, pushing past him. "You're just a lineman." "But you're the one doing all the blocking," Ross groaned. "I told you, I'm working." Clarissa grabbed a couple of bags of chips and headed for the checkout. "I'm already late enough." Clarissa made her way to the checkout. The crack of the fly swatter on the chipped counter made her jump. Hubie Gilbert shook his head at the phlegm-colored spatter. The next person in line gagged at the sight. Hubie didn't bother wiping up the mess as he rang up the customer's items. "Damn strange little critters," the attendant said, gesturing toward the prismatic bits of exoskeleton smashed into the carnage. "Being downwind of the dump, they're all over my place." "I can imagine." the customer muttered. He eyed the pulped insect. Gotta be this back and forth weather. Gotta be something, I reckon, Hubie replied. Clarissa hadn't thought about it, but it did seem there were more flies than usual. The house had been full of them when she awoke. Maybe it was the weather. Summer kept trying to fight its way back from its seasonal grave. Despite being the beginning of November, the river valley had been sitting pleasantly in the 70s for a week. A cold snap was coming, but not before hitting near record highs that afternoon. The train of thought was derailed by Ross, turning her forcibly. We're 3rd and 10 here, babe, Ross said. It's time to take it to the end zone. Not gonna happen. Sure it will. Ross leaned in and kissed her. She gave him an ineffectual shove, but he recoiled nonetheless. Ross slapped a hand to his mouth in response to the sting in his lip. When he removed the appendage, Clarissa saw the blood. She dropped the chips and soda to cover her nose and ran out of the station before anyone could see she was bleeding again. Clarissa made it halfway down the block before she took a tentative glance at her hands. Only there was no blood on them this time. She slowed to a brisk walk and dabbed her lip. Nothing. When Clarissa arrived at the Wright home, the boys had set the table. Knowing they had some lead time on their sitter, they ran to Buck's Wild Discount Outlet for a huge bag of mixed Carson bars and jack-o'-lantern-shaped brownies that had been on clearance, all of which were arranged on plates in front of the chairs with a piping hot lean cuisine in the middle of each and an overflowing popcorn bucket as the centerpiece. Grover was pouring juice in and around the glasses when Clarissa walked in. We wanted to make dinner, Will said. We picked things we couldn't burn down the house with. Good call. Clarissa put her stuff down and joined them at the table. I want the lasagna. Deal. Grover swapped the plates so that he got the spaghetti and quickly spat on it. Which one do you want, Will? His brother glared at him. He didn't want the chicken Florentine, but he definitely wasn't going for the spit-getty. They all took their seats and started eating. Clarissa sniffed a few times. She could hardly smell any of the food, leaving her taste buds grossly disappointed by the first bite. Sorry, she mumbled, then sputtered her lips and repeated it louder. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have tried to get you all to do a dumbass challenge. A lot of kids are getting hurt. The laugh wouldn't have been worth it if that had happened. Some of the kids in my class tried it, Will shrugged. Guess they got nosebleeds too, since they weren't in class. Told you drugs are bad, Grover said. You were right, Clarissa assured him. Clarissa looked down at her lasagna and prodded the cheese. In the stringy folds, something wriggled out of sight. She leaned her face in for a closer look. A tiny white grub, a little larger than a grain of rice, plopped into the sauce. It twitched and squirmed in the hot fluid. She saw the first one tunneling between the noodles. Grover screamed, falling backwards out of his chair. Will jumped upright, knocking his own seat over. Clarissa looked at both of them. Their faces were stark and quivering with panic. She looked at the lasagna once more, and another maggot dripped into the low-calorie meal. Her nose began to twitch. It ached worse than before. She brought a hand up to it. Pinpricks stung her fingers, and she whipped her hand away. The hooked fangs of the maggots were buried deep into the pads of her fingertips. The little worms danced as they chewed the flesh. Clarissa drew in a breath to scream, but choked. She stumbled away from the table in a hacking fit that dislodged a number of the feisty grubs on the laminate flooring. Her nose gushed blood. Maggots clung to her nostrils, fighting eviction from their moist, dark home. Clarissa's skin writhed. A tear duct ruptured, trickling blood down her cheek. The maggots poked their heads out inquisitively, and then ducked back inside the girl's face. Clarissa collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Ross banged his head to the music and shut the water off. He roughly toweled his hair before stepping out of the shower, leaving a puddle on the tile. Mark Garvey was an excellent provider for his family, but his paternal ability stretched no further than cash transfers and check signing. Building the apartment over the garage for Ross had allowed him to say, "I love you, son," without having to actually spend any time with his offspring. Ross didn't give a damn. A father is just a low bar to surpass on your way to manhood. As far as he was concerned, he had. Ross saw the apartment as his dad's way of acknowledging his son's superiority. Ross used the towel to clear steam from the mirror. If Clarissa wanted to be an uptight cock tease, that was fine by him. 2 5s was a 10, and Clarissa's best friends, Trina and Miley, were certainly 5s. Neither of them was going to get a first stringer on their own, so when he made the offer, they jumped at it. A threesome with ugly chicks was still a threesome. Ross dried himself off with half-assed effort, tossing the towel into the hamper with the rest of the week's laundry. If his mom was going to wash it, she could at least come and get it instead of waiting for him to bring it to the laundry room. He ignored the impending inconvenience of lugging the clothes down the stairs that he walked down every day and focused on getting ready for his date. Fuck me! He leaned close to the mirror to examine the boil on his lip. It looked like a pimple at first, but then he saw the inflamed red edges. Ross banged a fist on the counter. He grabbed his phone. "Hey, Siri, what does herpes look like?" He knew raw-dogging Jackie Banks had been a bad idea, but he thought buying the Plan B would be the last he heard of it. Obviously not, he realized, as he prodded the sore.
Shh, it was only the wind. You're safe. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Siri gave him a list of links for more information. Reading was never his strong suit, so he decided on a more realistic approach. He'd steal some concealer from his mom's makeup kit and forget about it. He poked at it once more, and it poked back. Ross flinched. He put his fingers on his lip and felt the wound pulsing against the tips. He brought his face as close to the mirror as he could. In the center of the boil was a tiny, white head. Shit. This is going to suck. He prepared himself to try and pop it. The head bulged but didn't rupture. Blood spurted in tiny drops against the glass. Ross mashed harder. The pain grew more intense. The boil finally broke open. The maggot dangled from the edge, squirming wildly. Ross stumbled away, shrieking. His feet slipped in the puddle beneath him, and then flew into the air. His head cracked open on the edge of the tub, oozing its contents onto the tile. The maggots wiggled from the pus-filled wound and made for the green pastures of his nostril. Trina and Miley would be pissed, but not surprised, that Ross stood them up. His father wouldn't bother coming by. Neither would his friends. No one would know he was missing until his mother came to collect the laundry on Monday. By then, the maggot would be no more. The aerosol can sputtered with the last of its contents coming out in a pathetic spittle. Hubie went to trash the depleted bug spray. It was the second can he'd used in 3 days. The houseflies zigged and zagged through his kitchen. One bounced off his forehead, no doubt intoxicated by the discount insecticide. He swung the can like a billy club, knocking one of the pests from the air. "It's going all the way for the fences," Hubie chuckled. "About the only way this shit is killing anything." Hubie stepped on the pedal, and the trash can lid flipped up. A buzzing black cloud of insects swarmed from the darkened sanctuary of rot and filth. Hubie backpedaled, swinging the can wildly but still batting a few as the kitchen filled with flies. He watched a pair of the big, brightly colored ones darting in and out of the pestilent cloud. Hubie made it from the kitchen and slammed the door. He grabbed the quilt from the back of the sofa and stuffed it into the crack at the floor to keep the bastards inside. Lord have mercy, he muttered. The drone of the flies could be heard through the farmhouse's thick wood door. Hubie stared down at the quilt and felt a tinge of guilt. His late wife, Clara, had made it herself. She'd been so proud that he hadn't bothered telling her it was the ugliest damn thing he'd ever seen. Clara would have kept him in line. He should have taken the trash out 2 days before. There were several dirty plates sitting in the sink. He'd practically set the table for the damnable pests. Hubie started for the front door. He kept a pump sprayer of good poison in his garage. It was meant for outdoor use, but Hubie didn't figure it would matter at his age. Hubie's hand stopped short of the knob. The buzzing wasn't as loud as that of the infested kitchen, but it was loud nonetheless. He eased the door open and found them clinging to the screen beyond in such numbers that it obscured his view of the pasture beyond. A cool breeze carried the moist, grotesque stench of the dump. He'd inherited his childhood home and the expanse of land when his parents passed away. That had been a bad time for him. He'd been nipples deep in debt so crippling that he'd sold the adjacent parcel to the county, without asking any questions. Perhaps if he had, and waited out other offers, he wouldn't live next to the new dump. Hubie squinted through the swarm, and in the dying light of day, he could have sworn someone was walking through the pasture. Normally he'd run them off, but he wasn't about to risk letting more flies in. He shut the front door with a sigh. What was one more trespasser, he thought. The cold front was supposed to roll in over the next 2 days, so, worst case scenario, he'd have his kitchen back in 48 hours. He wasn't much of a cook anyhow. Hubie cast a final glance at the quilt and headed for bed. He made it to the top of the stairs and opened the bedroom door. Flies buzzed around the plastic tray of microwave meal he'd had before work and carelessly left on the bedside table. He followed one of the pretty ones as it flied onto the other nightstand, Clara's nightstand, and crawled across the tattered Bible she kept there. Hubie's stomach soured. Every night, they each read a chapter aloud for the 43 years they'd been married. He watched the shimmering body convulse as the fly vomited on the embossed title. Hubie backed out of the room and shut the door, thinking of a name he'd read on those worn pages, and of a strange man walking across his property. He sauntered to the bathroom and stuffed towels along the bottom of the door before stepping over the steep side of the cast-iron tub. He sank to the bottom for a long, uncomfortable night as he pulled a towel over himself for a blanket. Hubie would take the bathroom. The rest of the house and maybe the entire town now belonged to them. Belonged to Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. Clarissa sat in the wheelchair, probing the gauze with her fingertips. There was no definition beneath, not like there should have been. A shadow passed overhead, allowing her to see her reflection in the hospital window. The rest of the eggs had hatched on the ride to the emergency room. Any infection she'd gotten from the candy-snorting challenge had been disposed of in short order by the hundreds of starving larvae birthing in her sinus cavities. However, they'd taken plenty of good tissue along with it. She looked at her reflection, wondering how much of her nose was still there. It didn't feel like any beneath the thick dressing. She'd always had a small nose, a cute little button that everyone envied her for, especially her mother. It was going to be much, much smaller now. She moved her touch to the eye patch next. The doctors saved the organ itself since the maggots had been too preoccupied eating her eyelid. She looked down at the emergency entrance as another ambulance pulled up. The plummeting temperature was forcing the flies away, back to wherever flies went when it became too cold. She was afraid some would find their ways into homes, but the nurse told her not to worry about it. There was a new challenge and all the kids were busy hurting themselves that way. She wondered if pictures of her maggot-riddled face would go viral as quickly. Maybe if enough people saw that, they'd think twice before listening to some kid on the internet. The paramedics unloaded a gurney from the back of the ambulance. Clarissa couldn't tell much about the kid. except that she had a vacuum hose stuck to her lips. She glanced at her reflection once more. "I hope it turns out better for you than it did for me, kid," she whispered. The cloud passed by and her reflection vanished. She watched the paramedics wheel the girl inside and noticed the darkened figure standing on the other side of the ambulance. She hadn't seen him approach. He stood there, watching the girl, and then looking up, looking at Clarissa. She squinted her uncovered eye, trying to make out his face, but couldn't. A tap on the glass drew her attention to the corner of the window. One of the big, shiny flies butted against the glass. Its mouthparts dragged the surface, leaving a phosphorescent slime trail as it looked for a way inside. The cold fall breeze battered its membranous wings until it turned into a gust and tore one off entirely. "Hope you fucking die slow," she muttered.
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
She cast one last look to the man in black, but he'd gone exactly as he came. She rolled her chair backwards and turned it to leave the room. Her phone sat on the table beside her with a dead battery. She was done with phones. She'd spent over half her life with one in front of her face, and now she had half a face for the rest of her life because of it. Yes, she was done with phones. And candy. Kara Garvey knocked on the apartment door again, but her son didn't answer. Typical. She worked the spare key into the lock and stepped inside to discover Ross had become an even bigger slob over the weekend. The blankets hung off his unfolded futon amidst a sea of Dorito crumbs. Empty Monster cans occupied almost every surface, along with protein shaker cups and their curdled contents. His god-awful music blasted from the bathroom where the worst of all the conflicting odors seemed to emanate from. Kara huffed. "Just because you don't pay the electric bill doesn't mean it's free," she complained on her way to turn off the stereo. She pushed open the door and screamed. The startled insects buzzed away from the buffet, leaving their larval offspring to debride the wounds. Bits of meat clung to bare bones. Pupas incubated the necrotic organs. Kara stumbled away, but the swarm engulfed her. She swatted and batted at them wildly. She made it to the door and tumbled down the stairs along the side of the garage. Most of the insects retreated back into the apartment, but she watched a shiny one, like a flying oil slick, dart away in search of a new den. Kara rolled over, crying out as broken bones grated across themselves. A man stood at the end of the driveway. Kara stretched a hand out for him. "Help me!" she whimpered. He stood there, unmoving. He seemed out of focus and didn't say a word. Kara blinked away tears. His form remained distorted. "Please help me," she said, louder. The wail of a siren drew her attention to the ambulance streaking down Derby Street. They'd heard a lot of those over the last week. An outbreak of myiasis had overcome the town's livestock, but several pets and a few people had been fly-struck as well. The best theory anyone could come up with was that the new dump harbored a hybrid species of botfly. Kara looked back to the man in black as the ambulance screamed past them. His body exploded into a swirling column of black flies. Millions of them, huddled together for warmth, rose up in a great black cloud and blotted out the light as they passed over her in search of food. It wouldn't take them long. In a town like Kohler, there were plenty of dead things. The Last Vacation by Mike Ashkewy. February 1st, 2024. I wanted a car for my 18th birthday. Instead, I got a really expensive journal and pen. My mom said she wanted me to remember the best days of my life and told me to write them down so I wouldn't lose them on the web or to a server outage. So, this is my attempt at doing just that. Maybe she'll be right. Maybe she won't. But it'll kill some time on our family vacation I didn't ask for. Most kids would be thrilled for fun in the sun, but I burn easily. I don't wear revealing outfits outside of a hoodie, and I don't like people much. My stepmom, Jill, told me that she met my dad, Peter, on an ancient website called LiveJournal, back when dinosaurs roamed the internet. Both really value the written word, but didn't always agree with the format or forum. So, for the next 12 days, I'm stuck here with my stupid stepbrother Roger and my parents in a tropical paradise, trapped on a boat filled with escapees from the old folks' home and boomers looking for new places to have sex. Gross. Look, I'm not stupid. I know I should be thrilled for this family vacation, but I can read between the lines. Jill and Peter are going to get a divorce. Honestly, I'd be surprised if they made it to the summer. Roger and I both heard the fighting over Christmas time. Holly jolly yelling, screaming, and sobbing. Followed by lots of nights watching Dad sleep on the couch and crying himself to sleep. I hadn't heard him cry like that since my mom died. My real mom. What happened between them? I don't know, and I don't really care. This is some desperate attempt to show that we're still fine, that we can still be a family, but I know when the clock is about to run out. It's not like Jill sucks either, or my dad is perfect. Sometimes things just don't work out. Sometimes. I'm handling it fine. I can deal, but Roger is taking it hard. Sure, he's 16 and pretty tough in a lot of ways, but he's hurting. He'll be okay, though. Even if me and Dad leave, he'll get a football scholarship and be into girls, beer bongs, and concussions. He'll be okay. I'm off to college in the fall, and then I can finally leave Cincinnati in the rear view and start my life any place that isn't Ohio. Rhonda Canavan has bigger ambitions than managing a Starbucks until I'm dead, or working at Walmart till I'm wearing Depends. Maybe these are the best days of my life, right? Sometimes I even believe that. I'm so tired from driving down I-75 to Fort Lauderdale. Listening to shitty political radio and Taylor Swift saps my will to live. My parents told me radio wasn't always shit, but I have a hard time believing that. Time to settle into the hotel room for the night. Tomorrow we board the cruise ship and start our whirlwind tour of places I never had any intention of visiting anyway. Of course the fucking Wi-Fi doesn't even work in this place. February 2nd, 2024. Spent most of the day boarding this giant cruise ship, the Vanguard of the Seas. It's like being on an aircraft carrier. The ship is absolutely huge and just full of people and stuff to do. There are tons of options for food, entertainment, pools, and even casinos and amusement park shit. Saw so many types of different people. Not just people collecting Social Security either, and quite a few kids close to Rogers and my age. A collection of America and likely the world, just all intermixing and expecting to have a good time and spend a buttload of cash while doing it. I don't want to imagine how much my parents paid for this trip, but I hope it didn't come out of my college fund. Makes me glad I've saved up a bunch of money from working at Starbucks and doing other kids' homework at school. Girls gotta pay her bills, and I have expensive hobbies. Nerdy hobbies. Okay, one expensive hobby, but it's how I met my friends Trey, Owen, and Jenna. We all play Dungeons & Dragons together Wednesday nights after work. I float the bill for the books, maps, and the little game tchotchkes. Roger always comes in and starts quoting Game of Thrones at us, though. We all had a laugh when I kicked him in the balls last year and called myself Khaleesi, Breaker of Balls. It's okay, he got back at me when he snapped my bra so hard it bent a clasp and left a nasty welt on my back for a week. After we all had family dinner, I started wandering around the upper deck of the ship. Jill and Dad went off to do some couple stuff, I think, and Roger is off doing Roger things. My guess is likely trying cheesy pickup lines on girls. Trying and failing. Badly. It's pretty out here and sure as hell beats the urban decay of America's least memorable city. I don't hate it, but it's so painfully boring and dull. I just don't want to end up like my parents, working jobs they hate in a city they hate and in a marriage that is falling apart. I planted myself in a deck chair and just watched the stars tonight. Typically, you get light pollution from the city, and you don't see a lot except the moon. If I had a boyfriend, or hell, even a girlfriend, this would be romantic. But nope, just me, my oversized hoodie, a little book, and my pen. It's weird though tonight. The sky is all sorts of odd colors, and I don't think it's the aurora or anything like that. I know the news before we left had mentioned something about some space stuff happening this week. I wasn't really listening, but it does look cool at least. Swirling greens and purples, all sorts of different colors. But they feel wrong somehow. Some of the stuff that relies on cell signals and Wi-Fi is being affected too. Can't maintain a stable connection, and so I can maybe see my social media for all of 5 seconds. I suppose it's better that way. I'm supposed to be out here enjoying the ocean, the surf, and the skies. Whatever the nautical version of touching grass is. I don't need to be connected 24/7, and maybe I'll enjoy myself a little bit more if I forget there is a world beyond the ocean. Tomorrow will be good. Maybe tomorrow I'll go do some family stuff and try to actually have a good time. I mean, how often does one get whisked off to a tropical paradise, free of charge?
If you're not afraid, then you're already dead. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
February 3rd, 2024. I actually had a pretty great day today. We all went down to the pool and managed some laughter, and it didn't seem awkward or forced. I haven't seen my dad smile like that in a long time. Probably when Jill surprised him on his birthday last year. She got him a sweet new laptop and drawing tablet for him to do his artwork on. Dad is an artist, or at least he thinks he is. He loves to draw and doodle, even occasionally manages to sell some art to local companies. Nothing profitable, but he loves it. Jill is the one who brings in the real money. She's an electrical engineer at the university. Roger and I went off and started poking around the ship. Basically, he wanted to see how big this floating palace actually is. We discovered all sorts of neat stuff, even found out they actually have a security force to deal with pirates. We saw a couple of the guys dealing with a few unruly guests in a corridor. It looked like a hell of a fight, too. We didn't hear any shooting, but Jesus, there was blood, gore, and discarded drinks everywhere. Couldn't tell what happened, but it looked like a few old guys got into it with a bunch of dude bros. I think one of the old guys bit one of the dudes and tore a chunk out of him. It's nasty, but if I'd gotten that on video, I could have posted it on YouTube or TikTok for internet clout. The rent-a-cops told us to fuck off, so we did and headed back above deck and back into the sun again. We spent the rest of the day at the pool and in the restaurant. People were talking about the incident at dinner and everyone was gossiping about it. I suppose, in a weird way, this is like a self-contained high school, and juicy gossip gets dished out along with the soup of the day. After everyone had dinner and went their separate ways for the night, I did the same. Roger found himself an arcade, and I think that's where he'll spend most of this trip. I don't know where my parents ended up, but if I had to guess, they weren't going to waste a good day and a room with no kids. I'd found a nice place at the back of the ship where it was kind of quiet, private, and had a good vantage point of the ocean and the horizon. The sky was that same weird color again tonight. I also heard a lot of noise coming from far off, too. It sounded like jets or something. I didn't think we were near any air bases or anything like that. Probably outspending the hard-earned tax dollars to pad their budgets. Looking up at the wrong-looking colors, I saw a lot of airplanes tonight. I'm even seeing what I think are lights from other boats nearby. It seems like the seas are crowded tonight and privacy is going to be hard to come by. Of course, the internet is completely down tonight, too. The webpage gives me some sort of an error, and I can't even get a signal for more than a few seconds. I thought I saw something on social media about something happening back on land, but before I could read past the headline, the page crashed. Something about a crisis. When isn't there one of those, right? Tomorrow I'll try suntanning for the first time in my entire life. No crisis here, except maybe sunburn. February 4th, 2024. This morning I awoke to Dad shaking me awake and telling me to get dressed. The crew had asked the passengers to stand by for an important announcement and that information would be coming in from the mainland. We were told to stay calm and reassured that everything was okay. Clearly something is fucked up when you hear that. We heard a knock at the cabin door, and a tray of food was left for us as we saw the crew moving from door to door and calmly leaving food and not saying a word to anyone who wasn't in a uniform. Then it hit me. The crew weren't just service people. They were all armed somehow. Some of the crew were those security guys we saw earlier, and some were others who seemingly conscripted into whatever the fuck this was. The captain, who identified themselves as Captain Paul Kennedy, said, "There was an emergency situation developing on the mainland, and we would be remaining at sea until ordered otherwise." The military had become involved, and the Navy was ordering all vessels at sea to remain there until the situation had changed. Something was wrong. Then I heard it. A gunshot. We all looked at each other and didn't know what to make of it. It couldn't be gunfire. Could it? Then the screams. First one, then many. Too many. It went on for what seemed like forever. I'll never forget when it stopped, either. 11:52 a.m. Another voice came over the intercom. And it wasn't the captain's this time. It was an older lady, and she identified herself as the ship's doctor, Dr. Chang. She said there was a sickness on board, and everyone would have to submit to examination by the medical staff and security. Any refusal would mean being locked up in the brig or removal from the ship by any means necessary. Why am I still writing? I guess it helps me to keep calm. I need to stay calm and clear-headed. February 5th, 2025. It's bad. I don't know what it is, but it's bad. The doctors came in this morning and examined everyone and told us to move our stuff to a different, more secure area of the ship. We were told to bring only the essentials and everything else would be provided for us. I grabbed this book, my pen, and the hoodie Dad had gotten me when we went to Washington in 9th grade. Everyone else packed what they figured was important, but it all seemed like it was grabbed out of panic, or by instinct. They herded us all into one of the big ballrooms and set it up like a field hospital, with cots and blankets. All the amenities and fun stuff was stripped out, and it was as bare bones and Spartan as you could get. I did notice one thing, though. There were remarkably few people over the age of 60 here with us. They're watching anyone who even sneezes like a hawk. We're also surrounded on all sides by people with guns and batons. We're not passengers anymore. We're being held here. We're prisoners. I overheard some people talking. I must be wrong. It sounded too crazy to be real. They were saying some kind of an incident had happened on the mainland and was causing people to go crazy and kill each other and eat each other. Like fucking zombies. There's no way this is happening. This is not real. This is real life, not Wednesday night D&D, and zombies don't goddamn exist. One person even started screaming about zombies, and the security guys beat on her with clubs and batons till she started crying and begged them to stop. She was dragged out of the room on a stretcher, and I never saw her again. It has to be a biological weapon attack. Terrorists, or like the Russians or the North Koreans, or bad drugs like bath salts or fentanyl. This isn't fucking happening to me. I'm supposed to be on vacation.
If you thought that was scary, just you wait. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
February 7th, 2024. I can't sleep, and I'm not sure anyone else is either. Everybody's on edge. Jill hasn't slept in days, and frankly, she really looks sick. I'm scared she'll get taken away by the ship's doctors or the security goons. No one is taking any chances at this point. Dad is trying to be a tough guy to help her, but it's not working. He's not a strong man. He's an artist. Dad cries at Lifetime movies. He just isn't equipped for this. Roger looks nervous and scared, like he has this panicked look in his eyes. I think he'll do something stupid. For fuck's sake, sit down and shut up, and please, don't cause trouble. People are still talking and gossip is hot right now. Rumor is that if you die, you don't. You come back. It doesn't even matter how you die, just that you come back. We've heard gunshots coming from below decks at all hours of the day and night since yesterday. One of the security guards left a handheld radio behind, and I listened for as long as I could. I think I heard all I needed to hear, though. It's over. We've lost the engine room. The infection is spreading. We don't know how to stop it except for a bullet to the head. I don't want to die. Not like that. February 9th, 2024. I finally saw it happen. One of the people beside me had a heart attack in the middle of the night. No one noticed until she tore the throat out of the person sleeping next to her. It all happened so fast, but it felt like time slowed down. All I could do was watch in horror. There was so much blood. The guards started shooting, but the person wouldn't die. It was so loud my ears were ringing. Everyone else was screaming and yelling, but they sounded far away. Finally, they shot the woman in the head, and she went down. But the body still kept twitching. One of the guards leveled his weapon at the remaining passengers. He reeked of booze, and the look on his face was something I'll never forget. They enjoyed what they did. They enjoyed pulling that trigger. A trio of guards stepped forward in an aggressive manner towards the lot of us, and one of them spoke. "Don't think for a second that we will hesitate to do it again. You need us more than we need you." The smallest of the trio walked over to the person whose throat was ripped out, pulled out his pistol, and shot them in the head to punctuate the threat. "We're not taking any chances. Now clean this shit up." They threw the bodies overboard. Burial at sea. Some kid followed them and started wailing as the bodies hit the water. I think it was their mom and dad. This is hell. I'm in hell. February 12th, 2024. Please tell me this is a nightmare. Let me wake up. Security staff have started escorting female passengers to alternative accommodations. Last night we woke up to screaming again. But it wasn't another death. A man was shouting as his wife and daughter were being forcibly removed. One of the guards broke his nose with the butt of a shotgun, and the rest just laughed and shouted drunkenly for him to stay down if he knew what was good for him. Someone has to know that I existed. If this keeps going as badly as it has been, I need to leave a record of what happened. Someone has to know that Rhonda Canavan existed, that I was a person, that I had a brother, parents, and they existed too. I had the best dog ever, Bugsy. I existed. I had a life. Please, if you find this diary, know that I tried, and I lived. I just want to go home. February 15th, 2024. We've all been moved again. This time we're being isolated to 2 decks, and they've shut down the elevators. We're locked into cabins and being given the absolute bare minimum for survival, and nothing else. There are a lot fewer of us left now. The doctors and medical staff come by constantly and aren't taking any chances now. The rent-a-cops are also interrogating people about what skills they have and taking them to the higher decks for necessary work. Dad should be safe. Not much call for graphic design in the zombie apocalypse. But I'm not so sure about Jill. Jill is an engineer and she'll want to help. She'll want to protect us and do the right thing. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I know she's a good person at heart. I keep hearing strange mechanical noises coming from below decks. It doesn't sound good, and I can smell something burning like oil and plastic. Hopefully they'll put her engineering skills to use. Maybe that means we stay alive or afloat or something. I don't want to think of the alternative, but I'm glad I'm still in my shapeless hoodie and sweats. February 17th, 2024. They killed Roger. They came to take Jill for engineering work duty. They weren't asking either. It was the middle of the night when they came. It happened so quickly. The door was kicked down and flashlights flooded the room. Dad and I froze, but Roger tried to stop them. Before he could even take a swing at the 3 guards, they shot him in the head. 2 of the bastards even laughed as he crumpled to the floor. The woman who shot him didn't laugh, though. Jill was hauled away screaming hysterically, covered in the contents of Roger's skull. That was the last time I saw Jill alive. The thing that will haunt me for the rest of my life was the terrified look in her eyes as they hauled her off her feet and into the corridor. We need to get off the boat, or we're going to die next, or worse. Dad hasn't said a word since they took Jill. He has a defeated look like he's 1,000 miles away. And he's not coming back. February 19th, 2024. I am not going to die here. I am going to escape. I don't know how, but I have an idea. I've seen plenty of movies and read too many trashy novels. If they taught me anything, it's that maybe I can make a rope ladder and get on the upper deck of the ship. Maybe I can steal a lifeboat or something. We have tons of bed sheets and stuff that I can use. Somehow I'll figure something out. I have to try. Dad still hasn't said a word. Jill hasn't come back. And I don't think she will either. I don't know what else to do, but I need to try and survive. Looking outside on the veranda and over the ocean, I can see lights on the horizon. It has to be other boats, right? There has to be other survivors besides us, right? Could be the Navy or someone. Anyone. Any place is better than here.
I like it spooky. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
February 24th, 2024. I've spent the last few days preparing my escape plan. It's taken a few tries and prototypes, but I think I'll be ready to go tomorrow or the day after. Relatively sure it'll hold my weight, or at least, I hope it will. I've saved up a few days' worth of food and water. I literally don't have a plan beyond getting to the top of the ship and seeing what happens after that. Doctors came in this morning and examined me and Dad. Thankfully, they found nothing, except noting that Dad looks malnourished and should eat if he knows what's good for him. Dad hasn't eaten or said a word. He's gone. I'm sorry, Dad. You may have given up, but I can't. February 26th, 2024. One of those lights turned out to be a U.S. Coast Guard ship, and they boarded us. So, maybe this is my big break, but I have to wait till it's less busy. You can hear a lot of raised voices and tense conversation coming from the deck, but no one has started shooting each other. That could change at any moment, though. Rumor is that the ship's stocks of booze are almost exhausted. I'm going to try and sneak aboard the Coast Guard ship and see if I can get out of here that way. I slept beside my dad, gave him a big hug this morning, but he wouldn't even look at me. He did speak, though, and it broke my heart into pieces. I'm sorry, Rhonda. I'm sorry for everything. If your stepmom and I hadn't been fighting, we wouldn't have come out here to fix our marriage. I'm so sorry. He just looked at his shoes and didn't say anything else to me. I know it's not his fault. Roger knew that. I'll even bet that Mom knew that it would get worked out. I don't blame him for any of this happening. I'm going to wait till dark, and then I'm going to use my rope ladder and try my best. Mom, Dad, Roger, I love you all. I kissed my dad on his forehead when he went to sleep, and for a brief second, he smiled, before a restless sleep took him back. I'm going to live for all of us. I have to at least try. March 1st, 2024. I made it. I successfully used my rope ladder and climbed to the deck and made my way to the top of the ship. There were dozens of guards and Coast Guard people milling about, but no one saw me or cared enough to stop me, a little half-starved teenage girl, from escaping. I hid and waited and watched for hours until people let their guard down. I did get spotted by one of the crew, though. She pointed her rifle at me. I thought I was dead and had failed after everything. She just looked at me with pity and said, "Kid, get the fuck out of here." I think she was the one who shot Roger. I couldn't be sure. Maybe this was her way of saying that she was sorry. I slid down a ladder connecting our two boats, and I hid as quickly as I could, anywhere that would fit me. I had started to feel hungry and sick, so I had to make myself known after a few days. I'm thankful they didn't shoot me on sight. I told them what happened to us on board. No one was surprised. They said it wasn't the first cruise ship they'd come across like ours, and some were even worse. The Navy and Coast Guard were trying to help as many people as they could survive at sea, but it wasn't easy. The Coast Guard told me that many cruise ships devolved into chaos within days of the incident occurring. Many were floating cities of the dead. Some were run by wannabe pirates or dictators as floating fortresses. What happened to the vanguard of the seas? I asked. They told me that it had been scuttled due to severe engine damage, and that it could have even been direct sabotage. A woman had sent out a distress call, and fortunately they were in range of the call to answer. Did Mom do that? Did she give us a fighting chance at rescue, somehow? It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, however. There weren't many survivors besides what was left of the crew and a handful of random passengers. Everyone had been transformed to a bigger Navy ship. They never did find my mom or dad. This will be my final entry in this journal. Mom and Dad wanted me to remember the best days of my life, but this was far from that. Unfortunately, I'll always remember these days. At least I can take some comfort remembering that I was with my family when the apocalypse came. My name is Rhonda Elizabeth Canavan, and this was my experience when the world ended. I existed. I had a life before this. I'll do my best to make a life after this. For Roger. For Mom. For Dad. What does my future look like? I don't know, but I tried, and for what it's worth, I'll continue to try. I used to be a doctor in an insane asylum. My patient destroyed my world, by Michael Kelso. This story needs to be told. Those who have suffered must understand why. It's not as simple as some have made it to be, which is why it needs to come from the person most responsible. Me. It began when I was least expecting it. But then, don't things always seem to happen that way? I'm telling you, Doc, people just don't understand, Frederick said while rocking back and forth in the chair. What exactly don't they understand? I said, trying to look more relaxed than I felt. There's just something that takes over. You can't stop it. Impulse control? What's that mean? Frederick said, struggling against his straitjacket, trying to get comfortable. It means that when you want to do something, you try your hardest not to. It means you try to control or suppress the urge to do things you know are bad. Frederick's mouth lolled open. He narrowed his eyes in confusion. Why would I want to do that? I suppressed the urge to sigh. Because that's what people do, I said. They think about doing bad things, but then they control themselves and don't do them because those things are wrong and could hurt other people. Hurting people is wrong? He said. Yes, Frederick. Hurting people is wrong. He shook his head as if he were trying to shake away a fly that was annoying him. Why? Why is hurting people wrong? No. Why are you telling me this? I don't understand. You're saying I'm bad, he said, trying to raise from his chair. You're saying I didn't need to hurt those people, that I'm a bad person. I got up from my chair and started backing toward the heavy metal door. I'm not bad, he yelled at me. You're bad! I knocked on the door and the orderly opened it as Frederick got to his feet. I slipped through the door as it slammed shut from the impact of his body hitting into it. Bad, 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 he screamed. Bad, 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 bad. Spit flew from his mouth, landing on the small observation window with metal grates embedded in it. You okay, Doc? The orderly said, startling me. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I turned and walked down the white hallway, hoping the orderly wouldn't notice the quickness in my step. I ignored the sound of Frederick beating on the door. I ignored all the sounds I heard. I just wanted to get away. It was a long walk to my office, through many security gates. At each one, the nurse buzzed me through and gave me an acknowledging look that used to be a smile. I suppose this place gets to everyone. Eventually. I finally reached my office, closed and locked the door behind me, and collapsed into my chair. I breathed out a sigh of relief at reaching relative safety. I turned and looked out my window to the beautiful flowers blooming on the trees in the courtyard. I looked up at the tree stretching toward the sky. I remember when they planted those. I turned back to my center, my means of solace, the only thing that mattered in this cruel, unfair world. I picked up the picture of my lovely wife and smiled. She was the one who kept me sane all these years. She kept me seeing the best in people, or at least trying. Sometimes there was no good to see, especially in my patients. It takes a special kind of doctor to care for the mental needs of those who have done heinous things that are so bad they don't even bother sending them to prison. They send them to me. I'm like the dumpster for the dregs of society. Just drop them in the asylum and forget about them.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
I kissed my wife and set her back on the bare desk, then turned on my computer and added notes from today's session. There was never a recommendation for release. Once patients came here, the only way they left was in a body bag. There was no curing them, only trying to make them docile until they left. Oh, and there were experiments. That was a large part of how we were funded. Companies would pay for certain tests to be done. Some might call it torture, but we called it research. I finished typing my notes and leaned back in my seat. The diplomas and degrees stared down from their perches on the bare walls, mocking me, demanding why I hadn't gotten a better job. As usual, I didn't have an answer. My office suddenly felt stuffy. I closed down my computer and left. Driving down the packed freeway, all I could think about was collapsing on the couch beside my lovely Elizabeth, not telling her about my day until she dragged it out of me, then listening to her encourage me to help those who have been left in my care, because I'm the only hope they have. Traffic was bumper to bumper and not helping my overall opinion of humanity much, especially when a car that was swerving from lane to lane nearly sideswiped me. It kept going on in front of me, nearly hitting several other cars. The driver and passenger seemed to be having a disagreement about how to drive the car, and it looked like it was about to come to blows. Fortunately, they were soon out of sight, and someone else's problem. For the next few miles, I kept watching the side of the road, waiting to see the offending car sitting in a ditch. However, they surprised me. They must have turned off to go terrorize some neighborhood streets with their reckless driving. I hummed to myself, not wanting to have whatever dreck was on the radio forced on me. When I was nearly to my exit, my phone rang. I immediately recognized the number as work. I contemplated answering it for a moment, then thought better of it. There had never been a time when work called with good news, and I was in no mood for bad news. I hummed a little louder, trying to drown out the sound of the ring before it finally stopped. The closer I got to home, the less I thought about work, and the more I thought about Elizabeth. Until I turned off at my exit, I had nearly forgotten work altogether. Maybe I would take tomorrow off and go do something with my wife. We hadn't been out for a while. The weather had been lovely, and I know she would adore a walk down by the lake. My thoughts were interrupted when I turned down our driveway and saw a car in front of the house. It wasn't quite in the driveway. It was sitting at an angle halfway in the front yard. I parked my car and slowly got out. Something struck me about this car, but I hadn't figured out what. I approached the driver's side to have words with the person still sitting at the wheel. "Excuse me," I said, staying a few steps back from the driver's door. He didn't hear me. "Excuse me," I said a little louder. Still no answer. I tapped on the window, and he ignored me. I opened the door. "Okay, look," I said, but it was I who would do the looking. The man fell out of the car, thudding on the grass. The inside of the car was covered in blood. I looked down, and the man's throat had been cut. "Oh my God!" I said, jumping back. I watched to see if the man was breathing, but the way his neck was bent at an unnatural angle against my yard told me everything that I needed to know. I glanced through the car but didn't see the passenger. It was then my eyes drifted to my front door. It was open. I stepped through the shrubs and up onto the porch, walking in a daze. The surrealness of the moment had yet to sink in. I was going inside to check on my wife and make sure everything was okay. It didn't strike me as anything more than that. Oh, she just left the door open, that's all. My mind kept trying to tell me that. I wanted desperately to believe it, even though she had never been that careless during the entire time we'd been married. I had pushed aside all reason and common sense in favor of pure denial. Everything was going to be okay. With Elizabeth, everything was always okay. She could literally light up a room with her positivity. She was the best person I ever knew. I have no idea how I got so lucky as to know her, let alone be her husband. I floated in through my front door on my cloud of denial and looked for my wife. It didn't take me long to find her. There was one wall of the living room she was constantly redecorating. She always said it looked bare and empty no matter what she did with it. She was hanging from that wall, naked, her beautiful body desecrated by slices and rips. Her throat had been slit, and blood still poured from it. I ran to her, tried to take her down, screamed her name, and then it was my turn to scream. I looked down and saw a knife blade sticking out from my abdomen. It was part of the cutlery set I had gotten for Elizabeth 3 Christmases ago. I screamed as I slowly turned to face my attacker. "What's up, Doc?" Frederick said, wearing a maniacal grin. The shock had punched a hole in my reasoning. I saw him standing there, but I couldn't accept it any more than I could accept my beautiful wife strung up like a macabre painting hanging on our living room wall. My eyes tried to focus on his face, to make me recognize him as a threat. "How's that impulse control working for you, Doc?" He ripped the knife out of my back. The pain, along with his arrogance, woke me from my shock-induced stupor. "Now do you understand?" he said as he shoved the knife into my belly. I did understand. I understood at that moment that I was already as dead as my wife. I knew that this piece of human garbage had taken something beautiful from this world. I knew I had to do something about it before there was nothing I could do, before my body succumbed to injuries, and I was unable. I grabbed him by the throat. He tried to laugh, but my grip was fueled by desperation. He tried to free himself, but couldn't. He began stabbing me over and over. I refused to release him. I carried him by his neck over to the kitchen counter and began bashing his head off the marble. I was rewarded with spots of his blood. I knew at least I had made him bleed, and that made me smile. His eyes grew wide as my grin grew maniacal. I smashed him repeatedly, crushing him against the sink, breaking the faucet and causing water to spray into the air. His eyelids fluttered as he lost his grip on the knife. He was nearly gone. I would take him with me, and that would be my parting gift to the world. Removing something so evil. Suddenly, my body wouldn't obey commands. My grip loosened. I tried to tighten it, but I had lost all control. I looked down and I was standing in a pool of my own blood. His eyes fluttered open, and he coughed. No, I thought. He can't live. He can't win. I had him. He stood as I sank to the floor. "Looks like maybe you do understand, Doc," he said from what seemed like miles away. "Too bad you won't be around to discuss it. We could have a session and evaluate how it makes you feel." His foot came down on my spine. I felt a crack. He started kicking me in the side repeatedly, splashing water and blood on me as I felt my ribs crack. I fought with everything I had. My body didn't even twitch. "No!" I screamed. "It can't end like this!" I heard a sizzling sound, and then there was darkness. I could feel movement. Wasn't I dead? Was this what happened after? It was still dark. "Hello?" I tried to say. Nothing. Just the sensation of movement. Am I in a body bag? Am I on my way to the morgue or the grave? Please don't let me be buried alive. But I'm not alive. Am I? I don't feel any pain. That's a good thing, but not a good sign. The last thing I remember was lots of pain. Suddenly, there's a light, and my movement stops. I look up from the floor of a house I don't recognize. Where the hell am I?
Did you hear that? Better check the locks on your doors. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
I'm on the floor next to a wall, looking up at an electrical outlet. Nothing around me seems familiar. I try to stand, but it feels weird. It isn't difficult, and there's still no pain. It just carries an odd sensation with it, like my body is just relearning things. Just like when I was a toddler. I teeter back and forth as I rise, but eventually I'm upright. My first few steps are tentative, but after that I gain confidence with each stride. Aside from the strange surroundings, there's a sensation like ants crawling all over me. I pass a bathroom and glance inside. The reflection in the mirror draws me back. I slowly approach it, seeing something unique and terrifying. It looks like someone drew an outline of a human form using a lightning bolt. The electricity shimmers and crackles as it races around the empty form of the being. I wonder if it will hurt me. Not sure if I want to test the limits of my newfound lack of pain. I hesitantly reach for this creature. It reaches for me at the same time. I'm mesmerized by this mutual curiosity. My hand is about to touch the electric pulse shaped like its hand. I tremble with anticipation and fear as we touch. Surprisingly, I don't feel any pain. I don't feel anything except a hard surface. I move my hand back and forth. The creature does the same. I make quicker movements, and so does it. Finally, out of frustration, I reach back and strike at the creature. My hand strikes the hard surface and it splinters. There are now multiple creatures staring back at me. I step back and make a horrible realization. I am the creature. 1 month later, and police have been unable to find any credible leads in the string of brutal killings that began shortly after the patient escaped from the mental hospital last month, the handsome anchorman stated from behind his desk. They're asking people to call in if they know the whereabouts of Frederick Winston, now known as the Mangler. In other news, the Larson Electric Company has issued a statement that the recent power surges are no cause for alarm. These surges seem to be random in people's homes and certain businesses. An LEC spokesman stated that there appears to be no pattern to the surges and that so far no one has reported them causing any harm. LEC is tracking down the problem and should have it under control soon. The anchorman shifted in his seat and turned to another camera. And on a lighter note, with Halloween months away, it seems that reports of ghosts are on the rise, he said, wearing a half grin. Several area residents have reported what they call a ghost-like figure outlined in light visiting them. Reports vary as to the duration and location of the visits, but they do seem to have a few things in common. The visits are usually short. In fact, most people say that if they blink, the figure is gone. No one has reported the ghost doing any harm, and it seems like anyone within close proximity feels a tingling sensation and their hair standing on end. Maybe I should be visited by this ghost instead of my next hairdresser's appointment, the attractive woman anchor said with a laugh. Schedule me a visit too, the male anchor said, smiling. And that's our news for the evening. Good night. Jimmy switched the channel. "Give me a break," he said to the TV. "Ghosts? Who's playing what? This is some marketing scheme to sell Halloween crap, like that stunt they pulled a few years back with the clowns hanging around the schools to promote that stupid movie." He switched off the TV and rolled over in his bed. It wasn't long before his breathing slowed. But before sleep could take him, he noticed a glow in the hallway. He didn't remember leaving any lights on when he came to bed. Living alone had its advantages. If he heard someone in his apartment, he knew they weren't supposed to be there. He slowly reached over to the bedstand and pulled out his Glock 9mm handgun, then held it close and listened. He watched as the glow moved. It seemed like someone was looking around. But for what? He didn't really have anything aside from his TV, phone, and video games. If anyone wanted those, they would be in a world of hurt. He had been lucky to get this apartment. If he was honest with himself, it cost more than he could afford. But when he had the chance, he took it. It was too bad the opening came because the person who lived there before him was one of the Mangler's victims. That's probably why he was able to rent the place so quickly and get the price down to where he could afford it, almost. Maybe the glow was one of the street people who were stupid enough to see if there was an empty apartment to claim. That wasn't going to fly either. Jimmy had jumped on this apartment to get away from the dingy rat hole he used to live in on the other side of town. And there was no way he'd let some bum come in here and take what was his. The glow crept closer. He could feel the hairs on his arms raise. There was a sound, too. It wasn't loud, almost felt more than heard. A soft crackle, like electricity when it sparked. The sensory input was almost too much for Jimmy to take. He pointed the gun in the direction of the glow and saw the barrel was shaking. His resolve that he could deal with anyone as long as he had his gun was beginning to fade. The glow became so bright that it finally took form. Jimmy's eyes widened. It was the form of a person, just like the news had said. It seemed to look around the room, then settle its gaze on the bed. Jimmy began to sweat as it approached and stared into his eyes. It was the oddest thing, staring into what should be eyes, but nothing was there. The flashes of mini lightning bolts formed shapes that looked almost human. But it was just an outline. There was nothing inside what should be the body. He shoved the shaking gun out from under the blanket and pointed it at the glowing figure. The figure noted the presence of the gun, then continued to advance. "Stop," Jimmy said. I'm warning you." The figure ignored the warning. Jimmy squeezed the trigger, setting off a deafening shot that went right through the face of the figure. It acted as though nothing had happened, continuing to advance. The ringing in Jimmy's ears made all sounds seem muffled. The figure stopped, 2 inches from Jimmy's face. "Mangler," it said, sounding less like a voice and more like a transmission over an old staticky radio. I'm not the Mangler," he said. "The person who used to live here was killed by him." It seemed to ponder this for a moment. "Find Mangler," it said. I don't know where to find him." It moved an inch closer as the flashes of electricity arced and licked hungrily at Jimmy's face. "Find him." Okay, I'll find him," Jimmy said, feeling the heat from the electricity. The figure seemed to consider that for a moment, then backed away. It moved toward the bedroom wall. Then, like someone had turned on a vacuum, it was sucked into an electrical outlet and disappeared. Jimmy laid back in bed, breathing hard. His eyes darted left and right all around the room. But the only evidence of the figure that had remained was the bullet hole in his bedroom wall.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
The trips through the electrical conduits had become easier. There were still times when I came out someplace I didn't intend to, but I was usually able to recover quickly and get to where I wanted to go. But where did I want to go? At first, I wandered around, lost in this new form I found myself trapped inside. It was only after I had overheard a news report about the serial killer they called the Mangler that I gained my purpose. Of course Frederick was going to keep on killing. Of course they weren't going to be able to catch him. He'd been inside away from his victims before and he didn't like it. Not being able to torture and kill innocents was like a normal person not being able to breathe. Not that I know much about being normal or breathing anymore. I suppose on some level I should thank him. I thought about it for a long time, and the only thing that makes any kind of sense is, when we were fighting, somehow the water and blood I was laying in got splashed into an electrical socket. Instead of killing me, it bonded with me, making me able to become the electrical current, to ride it like a wave to wherever I wanted. I became faster than any person ever was, and yet I wasn't a person anymore. I have no idea how I retained my consciousness, let alone my memory. But somehow, I justify it by the old adage, I think, therefore I am. My life has become an endless hunt for the person who destroyed me. The person I must destroy. I don't even know what I'll do when I find him, but I will find him. I will stop him. This time, I won't fail. I'll end him like I should have before. I owed it to the people he's tortured and killed since my failure. Most of all, I owe it to my wife. I know she wouldn't approve of my bloodlust. She would say there must be some other option. But if she would be able to see her own dead body hanging naked from our living room wall, I think she just might change her mind. My thoughts are interrupted as I arrive at my next destination, another victim's house. I'm not sure what I'll find that the police haven't, but I have to try. Maybe I can pick up his scent somehow. A plan almost assuredly doomed to failure since I lost all sense of smell in the transformation. I'm surprised, though, that I can still see and hear. I suppose waves of light and sound somehow intersect with my electrical body, and it senses them. I don't question it. I've learned to just go with it. On the plus side, I don't have to worry about eating, drinking, or using the bathroom. I guess there's an upside to everything. Elizabeth would be so proud of me. I arrive at the room where the victim was murdered. Looking around, there's still blood everywhere, along with evidence markers where they took pictures. The sheer amount of blood tells me he took his time. He desecrated this girl in her own room. Her parents must have been out because there's no way they didn't hear the struggle. There were books on the floor, a chair overturned, and blood everywhere. The room was a disaster. It looked like she fought him. I wish she would have succeeded where I had failed. But then, I wish I hadn't failed, and this girl was still alive. There's nothing I can do now except find him and end him. Finding him was proving more difficult than I thought. I had unlimited access to anywhere with electricity, but I couldn't use a computer or a GPS. I was limited to transportation only through electricity. Granted, that still made me the fastest being alive. I say being because I don't think I qualify as a human anymore. But I was limited to traveling to a place and then trying to find out where I was and if he was there. If he knew I was searching for him, all he would have to do is live the rest of his days in a cabin in the woods with no electricity, and I'd never be able to reach him. I believe two things worked in my favor with that theory. First, I don't think he's that smart. And second, I don't think he knows I'm looking for him. I believe that surviving our fight only further empowered him to kill. When someone feels invincible, they're bound to make a mistake. An officer walked into the room, and I ducked back into an outlet. I was able to hang on where I was and watch from the inside of the outlet without being transported somewhere else. The officer looked startled and stared at the empty air that I had just vacated. She looked like she was unsure if she trusted what her eyes had seen in the instant before I vanished. She slowly stepped over to the corner and bent down to peer into the outlet. For a moment, I wondered if she could see me, and what exactly she would see. But then her radio squawked, calling her to another scene. When I heard the voice on the radio say the address, and that they might have the killer cornered, I didn't waste any time. It was maybe 15 seconds until I was across town at the address I'd heard. There was a lot of screaming and crying going on. I came out of the outlet and saw blood on the floor beside a body that wasn't moving. There was a girl being beaten by a man with his back to me. He turned to take another swing, and I knew my search was over. My therapist used to tell me I needed to work on my impulse control, he said calmly as he slapped her. I think I'm doing pretty good. I've been here 10 whole minutes, and you're still alive. I shot across the room and knocked him to the floor. He jumped back and looked around for what had hit him. What the hell? I saw the fear in his eyes when he saw me. I know Elizabeth would have been ashamed of me, but I was enjoying his anxiety. After all he had done to me and so many others, I drank it in like an elixir. He started edging toward the door. I was there in a heartbeat. His eyes darted back and forth where I used to be and where I now stood. The panic in his eyes doubled. I wanted to make him suffer, but I didn't want to make the same mistake I'd made before and let him escape with his life. I lashed out with a bolt that used to be my arm. The energy slashed through his shirt and fried a hole in his shoulder. He screamed in pain and horror as he looked at the smoking hole in his skin. He tried to run, but in an instant I was there in front of him, firing another bolt and searing the skin across his waist to his jeans. His screams of pain and rage were only matched by the feral desperation in his eyes. Not knowing what to do, he went with the familiar, attack the innocent. He grabbed the girl who had been crawling away from the scene. He grabbed her again and held her in front of him like a human shield. What a waste of skin. I fired a bolt into a ceiling light beside me, which ricocheted and hit him full force in the leg, nearly severing it. He went down like a ton of bricks, trying to hold on to his hostage, but she was fighting to get away from him. She broke free and he crumpled to the floor. What do you want? He screamed at me. With everything that is within me, I wanted to tell him who I was and what he had taken from me and what I was about to take from him. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I wanted to give him only uncertainty and fear to cling to. I could feel the seconds ticking away. I knew I had to make the most of this opportunity, or he would get away again. And after this, I might never find him. I unleashed every ounce of energy at him. I couldn't even see him. He was only a smoking pillar of frying skin. Just then, the police burst through the door. Freeze! The first officer started. Then, the shock of what he was seeing stole the rest of the word from his mouth. He stood there, mouth agape, when the female officer stepped in behind him. She looked at me, and her wide eyes narrowed as she put two and two together and recognized me from the last crime scene. I had no reason to fear. I didn't know if I could even be harmed in my current state. But when you see that blue uniform burst through a door with a gun aimed at you, all rational thought takes a vacation. I dove for the outlet and was gone. I didn't even care where I was going. I knew I had done what I wanted to. The monster was destroyed. Something felt different. Was it pride at finishing my crusade? Was it shame knowing Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted me to do it? I don't know, but there was something else. It was like there was added weight to my existence. I guess you can have a conscience in whatever you'd call this existence. I appeared in the place that made the most sense, ironically. It was my old home, the one where everything I loved died, including me. It was where I took on this unintended new existence. Is that why I felt this extra weight? Was it some cathartic after effect of my search for revenge that was finally over? I looked around the charred debris of what used to be my home. In my mind's eye, I didn't see the burned out shell of what was left. I saw it as it was when we first moved in. When Elizabeth started decorating, when the interior was finally finished, and I turned to her and said, "For now," knowing she would decide to change everything at some time in the future when she was bored, just like all women seem to do. I remember getting a paintbrush across the mouth for that comment. I smiled, remembering kissing her with my freshly painted mouth and ending up in the bedroom. As I turned toward where I'd entered the house, my smile quickly faded. For some reason, I was still connected to the outlet. That had never happened before. Another curiosity arose when I noticed the color of my electrical body was now tinged purple. It had always been blue before. The tail of what had yet to come out of the outlet was red. As I pulled and it came the rest of the way out, it merged with me and turned purple. "What the hell?" I heard someone say. I whipped around, but no one was there. "Where am I?" the voice said. "Who are you?" I said to the air. There was a long silence. "Doc?" the voice said. As far as I knew, it wasn't possible for my spine to turn to ice since I no longer had a spine, but the feeling seemed the same. "Frederick?" I said. "What happened?" he asked. "This crazy electric thing attacked me and now..." "Wait a minute. How am I talking to you? You died months ago." My shock gave way to utter despair. My enemy was now part of me. I hope you enjoyed those 4 terror tales, my spookies, as much as I did revisiting them, whether they were new to you or you heard them last year. Make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting app, because next week we go into part 4 of the Spin the Bottle miniseries and a few more best ofs and other surprises as I start to recover from the last 3 months of 2024 heading into 2025. Also, we have something very special planned for Valentine's Day as well. So, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and leave us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really does make a difference, and if you want even more shows to enjoy, just head to weeklyspooky.com/join, and for as little as $1 a month, you get 2 shows every month, as well as almost 5 years of back catalog of exclusive stories and audiobooks just for you. I'll catch you next time.